reading from Exodus 14. Exodus 14, verses 1 to 14. Exodus 14, verses 1 to 14. This is what it says in the Lord's Word. Exodus 14, 1 to 14. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Tell the Israelites to turn back and encamp near Pi-Hiroth, between Migdol and the sea. They are to encamp by the sea opposite Baal-Zephon. Pharaoh will think the Israelites are wandering round the land in confusion, hemmed in by the desert. But I will harden the heart of Pharaoh's heart, and he will pursue them. But I will gain glory for myself through Pharaoh and all his army, and the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord." So the Israelites did this. When the king of Egypt was told that the people had fled, Pharaoh and his officials changed their minds about them and said, "What have we done? We've let the Israelites go and have lost their services." So he had his chariot made ready and took an army with him. He took 600 of the best chariots, along with all the chariots of Egypt, with officers over all of them. The Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, so that he pursued the Israelites who were marching out boldly. The Egyptians, all of Pharaoh's horses and chariots, horsemen and troops, pursued the Israelites and overtook them as they camped by the sea near Pi-Hiroth, opposite Baal-Zephon. As Pharaoh approached the Israelites, they looked up, and there were the Egyptians marching after them. They were terrified and cried out to the Lord. Then they said to Moses, "Was it because there were no graves in Egypt you brought us to the desert to die? What have you done to us by bringing us out of Egypt? Didn't we say to you in Egypt, 'Leave us alone, let us serve the Egyptians'? It would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the desert." Moses answered the people, "Do not be afraid. Stand firm, and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring to you today. The Egyptians you see today you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you. You need only be still." So the theme is about being strong and going places with God. At the time, we know it's difficult to go places at the moment, and perhaps because of our circumstances, we don't feel that strong, but with God, anything's possible. But I wonder if you are afraid. Does fear grip your heart because you don't know what the future will bring to you? Is it that the world controls your life? And do you appease it by serving it? It is said that the journey of the people of Israel in Exodus mimics the life of the Christian. This means if you're stuck in Egypt, you're in the carnal life and you do not know Christ. If you're spending your time in the wilderness, this represents when you recognize that you have a need of God, like that video was showing us. And you're struggling to try and find him and your place with him. And you're developing trust and faith. The issue is, of course, is when we're in the wilderness, we're at the mercy of the climate. It can be blown from here to there before we've stabilized and understood who and what Christ is in our lives. It may be that you're inhabiting the promised land, which represents that you are with God, you're in the middle of his creation, and that you're being fruitful and you're following the plan that God has for your life. I wonder if you know or you are aware of what stage of life that you currently inhabit. I know some of the time I have seems like half my one leg in the wilderness and half my one leg in the promised land. And sometimes perhaps I'm swapping back and forth, because we all go through things in our lives that come into our lives. Or we're blessed greatly by God, and then we know that we are doing what God desires of us. The people of God had for many hundreds of years have been praying to him. They wanted to be delivered from the bondage which they were suffering. And if you've done Bible study in Exodus, you know that they were literally taking the males that they were born, if they could, and they would take them and throw them into the Nile River, because the people of Israel, God's people, were growing in number, and the Egyptians were afraid of them. They were suffering, and they cried out to God. But it seems that as soon as God responded to their prayers, then they didn't like it. They didn't like it because it was change in their life. They had to leave, which was really what their home was. Had to go to a place which was not that far away. In fact, probably about a week's march. But they ended up in the middle of the wilderness because of their attitude, the fact that they were resistant to what God wanted to do with them and through them. God freed them, and the Egyptians let them go. And to let them go, they had to pay a terrible price, the Egyptians, didn't they? But it seems this wasn't enough for them. More was to come. What is your place with God? Where are you on your journey? Have you started? Do you trust him? Or do you live in fear instead in this world? Are you in bondage? And have you allowed the world to crash into your life so you feel that that's really your only blessing because of the pain that you're suffering? Or are you praying constantly to God to release you? The Lord said to Moses, "Let the Israelites turn back and encamp near Pi-Hahiroth, between Migdol and the sea." They are to encamp by the sea, directly opposite Baal-zephon. Pharaoh will think the Israelites are wandering around the land in confusion, hemmed in by the desert. And I will harden the heart of Pharaoh, and he will pursue them. The people had just set out from their time in bondage to the land that they had been promised, which wasn't that far away. They were attempting to put as much distance between themselves and those who had held them captive, just in case that they decided to change their minds, which they did. Yet, as the people looked at Moses, it was strange. He seemed to turn the people round and to encamp in a place which they couldn't defend. Their backs were sort of like to a small mountain range on one side, and there was a sea before them. They were stuck. And then they hear from Moses that God was hardening Pharaoh's heart to pursue them. The people must have thought Moses was absolutely stark raving mad. He was a madman. They just escaped the captivity, yet God wanted them to be at the mercy of Pharaoh all over again, and for them to be re-enslaved. I wonder if you feel times like this. Perhaps you started down a path with God, but you feel like you're in a cul-de-sac you cannot escape. You see no light, no hope. no escape, no blessing. You feel trapped by your circumstances and there's no fight in you. And you think about what happened in the past and you believe that's where you need to be. Are you praying and trusting in God? Yet it seems that around you what's taking place and your gut reaction is, your instincts is telling you what you're experiencing makes no sense. And fear has gripped your heart. And all you really want to do is run away. If you think about it, the people of Israel who removed themselves from Egypt numbered 1.5 million men. That's before you consider the men, the children and the women. Pharaoh's army perhaps numbered between, on the chariots, 1,000 to 2,000. And they were riding those chariots in the desert, which means it wasn't necessarily that manoeuvrable. They took some infantry with them, but not that number, because, of course, the chariots were running away from them. If you look at this situation from any sense of the word, then Pharaoh was absolutely stupid and arrogant to think that he would have stood a chance against the nation of Israel because of the number of people. Yet, the people were absolutely terrified when they approached. As Pharaoh approached, the Israel looked up, and there were the Egyptians marching after them. They were terrified and cried out to the Lord. They said to Moses, "Was it because there were no graves in Egypt you brought us to the desert to die? What have you done by bringing us out of Egypt?" When any change enters our lives, or when any hope perhaps that we see is visible and approaching us, we get fearful. Yet change is the very essence of life, for it brings new things. But fear stops us in our tracks sometimes, doesn't it? And if we're fearful, then our communion with God stops. If we fear man or the changes that occur when God does his work within the church, and especially if he asks us to do this, we feel that our grip just slips from our hands, our hearts falter, and we have that overwhelming fear that God has taken us to a place that we feel that we just cannot cope with. We cannot cope with because it's unfamiliar. And if we're full of fear, this means God cannot use us. And the situation only seems to get worse because we turn to sin, because fear makes us irrational. And we lose our focus and love of God, and especially of his word, and where he would like to tell us that we need to be. In this state, we yearn for how things were rather than the blessings and power and encouragement that God would like to do amongst us. The people of Israel, you see, were in a blind panic. They couldn't think straight. They says, "Was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us to the desert to die? What have you done to us by bringing us out of Egypt? Didn't we say in Egypt, 'Leave us alone. Let us serve the Egyptians'? It would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than die in the desert." They thought they were about to die, even though they vastly outnumbered the approaching army of the Pharaoh. Fear had gripped their hearts. They believed that they have no hope. They could not move. They couldn't act. They thought it was better to be under the dominion of slavers rather than the freedom that God offered them. They'd already prayed and yearned for this. The trouble is, they'd been so institutionalized they could not cope with the change, the freedom that God desired to give to them. They didn't know how to live in such a place. And instead they yearned for death rather than life. I wonder if this morning, if you're fearful, if you're struggling in your Christian walk and you feel that you want to go back to familiar territory of enslavement, to enjoy the sin of the past, do you feel it would be better to go back to the person that you once were and not go forward with God from where you are? And if you do, it means that you'll miss out the opportunity to the person that you need and must be. It's easy to go back, to reenact the behaviours which you once had, to do the things which can spoil our lives that are familiar and comfortable. It's easy to pick up those sins that we feel give us comfort and stroke them and smooth them, isn't it? Very easy. Very easy to do those things. To be a people under bondage. To be a people who are a slave with unfulfilled dreams, going and yearning for the past and the past glories and the blessings that God once gave us, rather than look to the future and to the present and see the blessings and power that God desires to place in our lives, which could provide us with a far greater peace and fulfillment and contentment and strength, because God desires to walk amongst you. But do we believe that? Do you believe that God desires to walk amongst you? The people of Israel met with what they thought was their doom. They couldn't flee, and they felt they couldn't fight. What did Moses say to them? Stand firm. Do not be afraid. I wonder if you're able to stand firm and not be afraid. Not allow despair to come into your life. That you would stand with God, because God wishes to deliver from who and what you are and to take you to somewhere where the world would no longer overwhelm you. If you feel that you want to flee and you want to return to how it once was, then you're in good company. It was no different from the embryonic Israel nation. They called themselves the children of God. They were fearful and they wanted to return to slavery. They desired to return to a life which had brought them early death and a harsh labour. As I said, the male children were cast into the Nile as they were born. They thought that would be preferable. It is written, was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us to the desert to die? What have you done to us by bringing us out of Egypt? Didn't we say in Egypt, leave us alone, let us serve the Egyptians? It would have been better for us to serve Egyptians and die in the desert. You may on times feel that you're lost and alone. God has found you and he's with you, so you're no longer alone. You may feel that you're in a desert, but God desires to allow his Spirit to come and water you and provide you with pastures that are green. You may feel that you have no comfort. God desires to comfort you and embrace you and bless you. Just need to recognize where our walk is with God and allow him to provide blessings, and to stop trying and allow him to work instead. Allow God to lead you to the places that you need to go, so that you may be able to stand firm and believe that he will deliver you. See, God is prepared to fight for you, to deliver you, if you would just trust and believe on him. This day, are you prepared right now to make a fresh start with God? You may say, well, I'm too old, I'm too weak, I'm too feeble. As I said earlier, God can take the lowly of us and transform the world if you're willing to trust. Perhaps you began years ago with God, but somehow it failed to materialize. And your journey faltered and you stopped. Well, why not today say, God, take me by the hand, I will start to make steps with you. It may be that you need a fresh impetus into your life. Well, why not reach out to God and start anew and afresh? And Lord, you need to give me your right hand of power, because without it, I can't do anything. With it, I can transform my life and those whom I love. It may be that you want to run away. Well, why not stand firm and then start to follow where God desires to take you. Perhaps that you have to start a new journey and you feel that you don't want to, but God can make you strong. If you're stuck in the wilderness, allow God to take you to the promised land, the way things should be, so you can hear and move forward with him. Let's pray. Dear Lord, I pray for your people here this morning. And I would ask, Lord Jesus Christ, that if the people are here stuck in the wilderness, that you would free them from it. And you would say, come into my promised land. I prepared it for you. No longer be in the wilderness. Come to me. Dear Lord, I pray for those who perhaps are in the promised land, but they've become too comfortable with it all. And you've got so much more to bless them with. Enable them, dear Lord. Empower them and say, follow me, and I will make you fishers of men. And dear Lord, they would know a fresh and bountiful blessing.